Hi everyone, welcome to eValue's fifth e-learning webinar. My name is Daniel Dekai. I'm a member of eValue's Task Force 3. Can everybody hear me and see my video and audio? Perfect. Okay, so welcome to our webinar number 5. As I mentioned, it's called Be a Young Evaluator Who Makes a Difference in the SDGs, even by working for the United Nations. Our speaker today is Marco Segone. He's a director of evaluation office at UNFPA. He's a former director of the evaluation office at UN Women, former chair of United Nations Evaluation Group, and the co-founder and former co-chair of Eval Partners. Just before we get started, we have a lot of people, I'm sure, that have already seen our webinars, but for those who haven't, it's a short introduction on how to use this platform. On the bottom, you will have a button that says your language, and feel free to change it from whichever language or to whatever language you'd like. We have a translation right now simultaneously from English to Spanish, French, as well as Russian. You can interact with our speakers or with each other using, using a chat feature on just under the video picture. On your right side, you can type messages there, questions. Okay. Oh yes, I just wanted to mention just before we get started, you can also type into this chat box any questions you may have during this webinar. There will be people who will be writing them down, and then we can address them later on after our speaker is finished. Okay, so just a few words about our roadmap and how do we get here today as eValue's Task Force 3. eValue's was launched in Nepal in 2015, and in early 2016 our task force was created. We are in charge of organizing conferences and learning events for young and emerging evaluators. And in 2016, we held our first virtual conference, which had over 600 participants registered. And after that, we launched our e-learning series. As you can see, this is our webinar number 5. A few words also about the participants today. We have just a little under 200 participants registered. And as you can see from the slide, we have people from around the world. The pins in blue are English speakers, purple are people who speak Russian or tuning in the Russian language, yellow is Spanish, and the red is French. And the mean age for our participants is 35, 4.5. Most of the people who are tuning in today have about 4.5 years of experience in evaluation, and about 33% are part of AVOPI, which is the volunteer organization for professional evaluators. And one of our goals is basically to increase this number. I would also like to acknowledge Eval Partners and Marco Segone, and thank him for his ability to join us today. And also I would like to thank the Eval Youth Leadership, Bianca Montrose Moorhead, Marie Gervais, and Khalil Bitar, and the Task Force 3 leadership, Josette Arevalo, Sofia Esteves, and Antonina Riscu-Porcescu, as well as the Task Force 3 members, Sarah, Imad, Gerardo, Ana Erika, Kelsey, and myself. Okay, so without further delays, let me give the floor to Marco. Just remember, after about 35 to 40 minutes, we will have a Q&A session. So again, if you have any questions, please write them down in the chat box below to your right. And thank you very much, Marco. And again, welcome to Eval Youth.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Can you just confirm that you can hear me, or anybody can write in the chat Okay, very good. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. And I'm really glad to be here to this live webinar today. And thanks a lot to Eval Youth and the organizer for organizing the webinar. Apologize for some reasons.
I'm sorry, Marco. Just to interrupt you, we have no video. If there's anything that you can adjust on your settings, we can hear you well, but we can't see you.
Telling to one of your colleagues, but we, for some reasons, is not working the video. So I'm afraid that for this time, we just have to go with a PowerPoint. Sorry about that. So in the next 20 minutes, I hope I'm not going to talk more than 20 minutes, so that we will have time for the Q&A after that. I will mainly tackle 4 points. The first one is why the Sustainable Development Goals are our biggest opportunity. The second, why and how you can make a difference. The third, how to be a young evaluator in the UN system. And then just a few final personal tips that covers the first 4 points. So if we start with the first one, why the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, are our biggest opportunities. As you probably know, in 2015, the head of states of 192 countries, meaning virtually all the countries in the world, plus representative of the civil society organizations, private sector, UN agencies, international organizations, etc. They met together at the UN General Assembly in New York, and they endorsed the so-called Sustainable Development Agenda, that is also called the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. I'm pretty sure that you are already quite familiar with that, so I will just highlight a few key elements of the SDGs. First one is that the SDGs, unlikely the previous MDGs, unlikely the previous Millennium Development Goals, the SDGs are universal. That means that they are relevant and apply to all countries in the world, and not only to developing countries in the global south. Just to give you an example, SDG 5, that is about gender equality, is one goal that unfortunately has not been met by any country in the world, including those countries that by tradition have been the most active in gender equality. So first one is they are universal for all countries in the world, including the global north. The second is that they are comprehensive and integrated. So they are 17, and mainly they are about the so-called 5 Ps. So they are about people, so they are about human development. They are about prosperity, so they are about poverty. They are about planet, that is about the sustainable development. They are about peace, because we all know that without peace, human development is not possible. And they are about partnership, because as these goals are really ambitious and transformative, they will be achieved only through multi-stakeholder partnership. And here, let's see if it works. Well, no, it looks not, because here you would have is an hyperlink to a website that shows you really how the different 17 SDGs are interconnected among each other. And mainly it shows you these figures, but the difference is that once you receive the PowerPoint, if you click in that hyperlink in the previous slides, you will be able also to move this bubble that you see, and to see when you move one, everybody else moves too. So just to explain, the big circle are the 17 SDGs, and the small one are the 169 targets. And here the key concept, the key message is that the SDGs and the targets, they are really very much interlinked. And if you want to achieve them, then you need really an integrated approach, because if any change that happens in one will affect all the others. So as you can see, we are talking about complexity. And I'm mentioning that because obviously it will have also some important implications for evaluation. The third big important element of the SDGs is that there is a clear and strong call for no one left behind. So the idea is that the days of the national averages are gone. The idea is that, unfortunately, as you probably know, the world is becoming more and more unequal, both unequal in terms of between countries, but also within countries. Even if we take the rich countries or the middle-income countries or the emerging powers, let's say, there are a lot of internal national inequalities. And here, so we have the SDGs have two goals, the SDG 5 that is about gender equality, and the SDG 10 that is about reducing all other type of inequalities. And important to say is that the aspect of the inequalities is presented as two standalone targets and goals, but is also mainstream in all the other 17 goals. So it's really about reaching the one left behind, reaching the farthest left behind. The fourth important aspect that was not the case for the previous Millennium Development Goals is that these 192 head of states from all over the world agreed on a robust, effective, inclusive, and transparent follow-up and review framework. So and they also gave additional information on this framework, follow-up and review mechanism. They say that it should be country-owned. They say that it should be open, inclusive, and transparent, and support the participation of all people and all stakeholders, and therefore, obviously, also of young people. And they should be rigorous and based on evidence, and informed by country-led evaluations. And therefore, there was also recognition and a call for strengthening national evaluation capacities. Now, let me move to the second aspect, item of today's webinar, and it is that the fact that the SDGs are our biggest opportunity as well as our biggest challenge. Our biggest opportunity because for the first time we had the head of states of virtually all countries in the world, but also the heads of the international civil society organization, private foundation, multinational companies, the UN, etc. They committed to make sure that the world and each country will be able to attain the SDGs by 2030. And they also committed to follow up and review the implementation of these SDGs. And therefore, there is more and more demand for evaluation at country, regional, and global level to inform decision-making for the SDGs, the global SDGs, but most importantly, the localized SDGs. So it's our biggest opportunity because there is a more and more a stronger demand for evaluations. However, is also our biggest challenge because the expectations are increasing. And one of the biggest challenge is how to evaluate equitable interventions. I just mentioned the fact that one of the key principles is the no one left behind, and therefore we should make sure that whenever an evaluation is conducted, the evaluation questions should assess if the interventions are relevant and they are having an impact in decreasing inequalities between the different populational groups and in achieving results for the worst off groups. So we should ask ourselves what are the methodological, political, social, and financial implications in designing and managing these kind of evaluations, and also very important on how to strengthen the national capacities to conduct this kind of interventions. So the good news is that the UN, mainly led by UNICEF, UN Women, and UNFPA, came up with an approach that is called the Equity Focused and Gender Responsive Evaluations that really tries to address the challenges that I just mentioned. Now, today we do not have time to really look in depth about equity-focused and gender-responsive evaluations. However, the good news is that a lot of material is already available free of charge. For example, the manual, the handbook that you see on the left side of your screen, How to Design and Manage Equity-Focused Evaluation, is available in English, in Russian, in Spanish, and Arabic and French, free of charge in the Eval Partners website. And this is really a step-by-step practical guidance on how to manage equity-focused evaluations. The one on your right, Evaluation for Equitable Development Results, is a collection of articles from the most renowned leaders on evaluation, like Michael Quinn-Patton or Michael Bamberger and many others, who wrote how different evaluation methodologies and approaches can contribute to equitable development results. In addition, also the United Nations Evaluation Group, that is the network that brings together the evaluation offices of 48 different agencies, also develop practical guidance on how to integrate human rights and gender equality in evaluation. And the good news is that also this resource is available free of charge in the UNEC website, in English, in Spanish, in Arabic, in French, and in Russian, and in Chinese. Also, still with the UNEC, UNEC has the norm and standard for evaluations, and just 2 years ago, these norm and standard for evaluation were revised, and equity and gender equality is a new standalone norms that have been introduced in the revision of this normative framework. So once again, I would like to invite you to go to the UNEC website and download this. And once again, this is available in all of the 6 UN official languages, that is English, French, Spanish, Russian, Arabic, and Chinese. Now, let's move to the third point. And the third point is why and how you can make a difference. So we have seen the big picture, the SDGs. We have seen that within the big picture, there is a specific focus on no one left behind. And we have seen that already the global evaluation community developed guidance and manuals and handbooks and resources on how to conduct evaluations that are focusing on the no one left behind. So how you can leverage these resources and make a difference? First of all, let me talk just for a moment about the power of the 1.8 billion. And that's the number of young people in the world. So young people amount at a total of 1.8 billion. So you can imagine if young people comes together to ask and demand that the SDGs are actually implemented, that results are really to be achieved, and that the SDGs have to be monitored and evaluated. You know, I always say if these 1.8 billion young people jump together in the same moment, the world will really move and shift. So it's really the power of having this really critical mass of inhabitants of the world that can really make a difference. The second message is that usually you hear saying that young people are the future. Well, I would say young people are not the future. Young people are the present and the future. So here is another invitation to really to engage now and not to wait for young people to become adults. We need young people to engage today so that they can start to make a difference today for when they will be adults, but also for the next generation of young people who is coming. So really a strong call to make the difference from now and here and not tomorrow and the future. Now, how you can make the difference? Well, I mean, there are different manners and different ways. Of course, I mean, you can make the difference in your own life through small actions. You can become an activist for sustainable development, and you can also become a young evaluator if you are not already a young evaluator. Because you have to remind that evaluation is an agent of change. Evaluation can really be a tool, an instrument that will push decision makers and also any stakeholders or any citizen to reflect on what is working and what is not working, to reflect on what's working and why, and in what circumstances and for whom. And therefore, based on that reflection, can really foster change and transformation. But to be a young evaluator, I would say, is not enough. My plea is to be a young evaluator that is true to the United Nations values of human rights, social equity and justice, gender equality, sustainability, and peace. Because if we want evaluation to make a difference in the context of the SDGs and the 2030 development agenda, we have to make sure that our evaluation have to look at these aspects, have to look if our interventions are really reaching the most disadvantaged and the most worst off groups. So our evaluations have to be designed in such a manner, and therefore they have to be true to the value of the United Nations. And this brings me to the last point, that is how to be and how to become a young evaluator in the UN system. And here I'm just drawing on my personal experience. So first of all, I would say try to have external experience. And here, if you allow me, I can give you some of the personal history of myself, how I became a UN evaluator, meaning an evaluator who is working for the UN system. And mainly, I just starting as a pure volunteer. So, you know, I just went in a few Asian countries in volunteer projects with NGOs, and I started to build up also my professional skills, you know, after you finish university and your studies, in the real world, because that's really appreciated by the United Nations system. Once you have some, let's say, basic experience, practical experience, then you can, for example, apply for an internship in a UN agency. And usually different UN agencies, if you go in their own websites, they have the instructions on how to apply for internship in the UN. Another way is also to start as a consultant. So the consultant is also another. Sorry, it looks like I'm seeing messages that say that you cannot hear anymore. Okay, so I continue. Sorry. Okay, so it means there is only a few people who cannot hear. So I was saying another way of starting with the working for the United Nations is through consultancies. You know, consultancies that are very specific and ad hoc, but the consultancies are let's say an opportunity for you to be exposed to the work of the UN, for you to better understand how the UN work, but also for you to get to know to be known, let's say, from the UN, because sometimes, not always, but sometimes consultants then once they apply for a junior staff post, of course they can highlight the experience that they got in the UN system as consultants. And so consultants can be also an entry point to start working for the UN as a junior staff. In addition, there are two other special programs, the so-called JPO and the YPP. The JPO means Junior Professional Officers, and it is a special program funded by donor countries to have young people working for the UN as a staff member for 2 years, and is the donor country that is funding the cost of the contract, let's say. The downsides or the disadvantage of the JPO program is that mainly, as I said, it is funded by donor countries, and the majority of people funded through the JPO are the citizens of that specific country that is funding. However, there are some donor countries that are also accepting and welcoming nationals from other countries, from the Global South. And the other one, the YPP, that is the young professionals. These are programs that are funded by the UN itself, so it's open to any nationality, and it's really a specific program that really tries to facilitate the hiring of young professionals. And once again, if you go to the website in the website of the different UN agencies, you can find additional information. So, but you know, what's valued by the UN in young evaluators? And this brings me to my final slides. That is just some tips that I can give you. You know, if you are interested in working for the UN, you know, when you apply, keep in mind that usually, generally speaking, the UN looks, among many other things, for 4 things. First of all, that you are professional. First of all, that you have a strong theoretical but also practical background in evaluation. And therefore, you know, if you have studied in your degrees evaluation or RBM, etc., that obviously will be a big plus. But also, if you have experience in applying that theoretical knowledge in a real-world situation, that also would be very much taken into consideration. So first of all, you have to be professional and you have to be strong in evaluation. But that's not enough. It's necessary, but not enough. The second, as I already mentioned, is a commitment to the United Nations values. You know, working for the United Nations obviously is not working for any other organization or for any other private company. The United Nations really value your professional and personal commitments to the values of human rights, gender equality, peace and development, etc. Third, be passionate. If you are not passionate for evaluation, then my suggestion would be look for something else. It's really important that you are engaging not only from a professional point of view, but also from a personal point of view. It's really important that you believe in what you are doing or what you want to do, because that's one of the key drivers for making the difference. And last and not least, in a world where changes are so quick and so rapid, innovation and flexibility is also a very important element that is taken into consideration. And young people obviously are the ones that are the best positioned to be innovative. And I'm not only talking about, the use of new technology, social media, etc., that is very important, but I'm talking about a mindset of constantly challenging the status quo, a mindset of constantly challenging what has been done so far, so that, new solutions to either new problems or also old problems can be found and can really make the difference. Because at the end of the day, as I mentioned, evaluation is an agent of change for the world we want. And it's really up to each of us to make sure that this statement becomes a reality. So with this, I think that I finished my 20 minutes, and I would like to give the floor back to the facilitators to manage the Q&A session. And thanks a lot for joining today and for your attention.
Thank you, Marco, very much for that presentation. We have several questions for you, with 5 or 6 from people from the chat box. So the first question is, what can you recommend as far as any readings are concerned about evaluation on of SDGs in particular? Do you have any resources that our participants can look up in order to educate themselves about how to evaluate SDGs within their organizations?
You want me one by one?
Okay, I will read the questions as a group, which will, I think, a lot easier. Okay, so that was the first question. The second question is, someone asked, there's a problem in emphasizing of monitoring of SDG indicators without an evaluation. How can we influence on shifting the attention? Third question is, will evaluation have a place in voluntary national reviews? And how can young emerging evaluators be part of them? And one last question is, what methods are used to evaluate the effectiveness of the implementation of SDGs in the country? You briefly mentioned about survey of experts' opinions. So what methods are used to evaluate the effectiveness of the implementation of MDGs?
Okay, thank you very much for the very interesting questions. So the first one is about if I can have some readings to propose when it comes to evaluation of SDGs. So in addition to the readings that I already mentioned in my presentation that are relevant for the SDGs but beyond the SDGs, my first one would be, once again, if you go to the Eval Partners website, there is a book that is called Evaluating the Sustainable Development Goals with a No One Left Behind lens. So that would be my first entry point, because it's a book focusing specifically on evaluating the SDGs. So that would be for sure one important reading. The second would be also last year UNDP organized an international event in Istanbul that it was specifically on evaluation of SDGs, and it was UNDP in partnership with the European Evaluation Society. And 2 years before, UNDP in partnership with the IDEAS, that is another global evaluation association, also organized a similar event. And they came up with a book that brings together the key highlights of the conference, and is titled Evaluation for Agenda 2030, Providing Evidence on Progress and Sustainability. So you can either go to the website of the UNDP Evaluation Office or of IDEAS and download this book. You can also go to the website of the UN. Every year in July, ECOSOC, that is the Economic and Social Commission of the General Assembly of the United Nations, at ECOSOC, countries, governments, they present the follow-up and review of the implementation of the SDGs in their own countries. So you will find in the website of the ECOSOC also some guidance on how that can be done. The second question was about the fact, what I call the big M and the small e. So the fact that often much attention is given to monitoring and less attention to evaluation. Thanks a lot for these comments. This is absolutely true. That's why in 2015, the Global Evaluation Community declared 2015 as the International Year of Evaluation. And 2015 was also the year where the SDGs were endorsed. So the International Year of Evaluation was a way to raise the attention of the importance of evaluations vis-a-vis monitoring. It's not vis-a-vis, but to complement monitoring. And the good news is that thanks to the International Year of Evaluation, the UN General Assembly approved a new, the first ever resolution on evaluation, on the importance of evaluation. And thanks to the International Year of Evaluation, the concept or the principle that the national follow-up and review mechanism of the different countries should be informed by country-led evaluations, because this principle was not there in the first draft of the 2030 agenda of the SDGs, and it was thanks to the advocacy done through the International Year of Evaluation that principle was included. But that's a global level. But the International Year of Evaluation was also done at local level, and notably, for example, at the National Parliament of Nepal, there was an event that called for the use of evaluation in national policy making. And after that, other events in national parliaments, for example, at the Parliament of Tunisia, at the Parliament of Kyrgyzstan, and in September this year it will be at the Parliament of Sri Lanka. There will be events where parliamentarians from all over the world, together with the evaluation community, will come together inside the national parliament and will request and call for the use of evaluation in global SDGs, local SDG, and national development strategies. And I hope that at the event in September at the Parliament of Sri Lanka, also young evaluators will be there. That's happened already at the Parliament of Nepal. That's why EvalueUse was launched at the Parliament of Nepal. And so I hope that will continue. The third question was, if evaluation has a place in the national reviews, and if young people have a place in the national reviews. So I already spoke, I think, about the fact that evaluation should have a place in national reviews. Unfortunately, this is not the case yet, and I would encourage you to go to the website of evaluators, because they did an analysis of the national reviews, SDGs reviews. They did an analysis to see exactly how many countries were informing their own reviews based on country-led evaluations, and that was the minority. But you can have the analysis. Now, how young people can be engaged? Well, for this, I would like to invite Bianca, who is one of the co-leader of EvalueUse, to tackle this particular one, because Bianca attended in February the UN Youth Forum, the UN Forum for Young People, and there were young people who explained how they were involved in the national SDG reviews of their own countries. So, so Bianca can elaborate a little bit more on this. And then the last one was what methods can be used to evaluate the effectiveness of the implementation of the SDGs. Well, I mean, those would be the usual methods that are already being applied to different level of evaluation, to policy evaluations, to program evaluations, etc. And we could talk for hours about methods, etc. But just to give you an example, here in UNFPA, we mainly use the theory-based approach to evaluation. So the idea is to see what's the theory of change that has informed the design of a specific intervention, being a project, a program, a policy, or a strategy, and then assessing if that theory of change was relevant and also if it was implemented in the right way. But in the case of the SDGs, as I mentioned in the beginning of my presentation, one characteristic of the SDGs is that they are complex, is really the complexity. So the global evaluation community is already discussing on what specific methods should be used in the case of evaluation of SDGs. And there is more and more talking about the systems approach to evaluation. But also the evaluation criteria. You mentioned effectiveness. So as you know, effectiveness is one of the 5 so-called OECD DAC evaluation criteria, the others being relevance, efficiency, sustainability, impact. And currently, the global evaluation community has started a process to discuss if it's the case to update the current, and I would say the old OECD DAC evaluation criteria in the light of the new SDGs. Because as UNEG updated its own norm and standard after 10 years, the OECD DAC evaluation criteria, they are even older than 10 years. So they were conceptualized when, I think 15 or 20 years ago, and the world has changed a lot in these last 2 decades. So just for you to know that there are even discussions about updating the actual evaluation criteria. Over to you, Daniel.
Thank you very much for that. We have a few more questions before we are finished. So the first one is, should the evaluation create new methods and tools in order to reach SDGs? And what about ethical issues involved in SDGs evaluation projects? So this was one question. The second one is how important is the subject sector matter experience for an evaluator? Is having expertise in carrying out evaluations and research studies considered sufficient? And I was personally also curious about if the SDGs differ somehow from the MDGs as far as the role of young evaluators is concerned, or emerging evaluators. Since there is more SDGs than MDGs, has there been a stronger emphasis on evaluation and hence perhaps more opportunities for young people? Okay, I'll give the floor to you right now.
For another round of very interesting questions. So, is there a need to create new methods, evaluation methods, to be able to evaluate SDGs? I think that more or less I already tackled this one when I was answering the previous answer on effectiveness. So yes, I think there is the need to create new methods or approaches for SDGs, and I just mentioned as an example the system approach to evaluations. That is an approach that really look at the complexity, how to evaluate complex intervention, and by definition the SDGs are complex. But also I mentioned that personally I think there is also needs to revisit and update the actual evaluation criteria, either how the existing one are interpreted, taking into consideration the SDGs, or even if new criteria are needed. And then I understand that part of the same question it was about the ethical issues. Absolutely, I mean, it's very, very important that ethical issues are always taken in consideration in evaluation design and processes. That's why, for example, the United Nations Evaluation Group has also guidelines on ethical issues in evaluations, because the idea is that as a minimum we should do no harm during our evaluation, during the conduct of our own evaluations. And by the way, the ethical issues are also a very important element that are looked at when an evaluator is hired, either as an external consultant or as, for example, a UN staff. The aspect of ethics is absolutely central to the work of the United Nations in specific, and I would say of the international development in general. Then the other question was about how important subject matter experience in the subject matter, how is experience subject matter important, and is expertise in evaluation sufficient? Well, I mean, that's also a very good and interesting question. And that's why, it is virtually almost impossible to find one person who is very strong in evaluation and very strong in the subject matter, especially because very often the subject matter is not a very defined thematic silo-sized subject matter, but very often the subject matter is integrated and complex, as for example the SDGs. And therefore, very often you need experience in several aspects. If I think about, for example, we are now starting to conduct an evaluation of child marriage. Child marriage is something that takes into consideration different matters. I mean, you have to be an expert in gender equality, you have to be an expert in a social norm and cultural belief, etc., and many other things. So that's just to say that often it's virtually impossible to find one person who is an expert in everything, and that's why, generally speaking, an evaluation is conducted by a team of evaluators. So by 2, 3, 4, whatever evaluators. So the important is that the team as a group covers all the subject matter and evaluations. So, having said that, obviously, if I have to recruit an evaluator, I will look for somebody who has a strong expertise in evaluation, as well as, at least as a minimum, familiarity with the subject matter. So both of them obviously are important. And the last question was how the SDGs is different from the MDGs. I think I already spoke a little bit on this during the presentation. So the difference in terms of complexity, the fact that they are universal, the fact that they are integrated, the fact that there is a focus on no one left behind, etc., etc. Now, if you hear to talk the UN Secretary General Envoy on Youth, that is also herself a young person, she will say that the SDG should be 18 and not 17, because one of the SDGs should be an SDG for young people that relate to young people. Now, as you know, there is no individual standalone SDG on young people. Having said that, I have to say that in the last few years, the attention to young people in the international community, in the UN system, etc., has really grown exponentially. That's why, for example, Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, appointed a special envoy on youth. And this special envoy on youth is really asked to take part of the key discussion and key decision relevant to the United Nations. So it's really a meaningful and relevant participation. So the role of young people, I think that as young evaluators, my suggestion, my recommendation would be, please, in the country that you are, is very likely that there is a so-called VOPE, the Voluntary Organization for Professional Evaluation. Those are the evaluation associations, let's say, that are active in your own country. So try to reach out your evaluation association in your country or in your region and engage with them, because that's also another very important entry point. And obviously, it goes without saying, try to reach out the EvaLyouth regional chapter in your region and to become active and maybe even to create a national EvaLyouth chapter in your country. Because in the SDGs, the opening to the youth, but actually the expectation from the youth is bigger and bigger, and so it's really a key moment for you to engage. Over to you, Daniel.
Thank you, Marco, for those thorough responses. We have Bianca, who would like to reply to your request earlier on. She's unable to join us with video and audio due to technical issues, but I'll just read out her reply. I had a powerful experience in New York at the UN Youth Forum in January 2018. Several member states, such as Sweden, Slovenia, and Netherlands, have taken seriously the role of youth and young people in the voluntary national reviews of the SDGs. I personally heard the delegate from Sweden talk about this experience. She was articulate, and it clearly was a very impactful experience. And although the youth delegate from the Netherlands did not speak about their experience, I know from some follow-up that a portion of their VNR was written solely by their National Youth Council. This brings us to the end of our webinar. Thank you very much, Marco. We really appreciate your time that you took to speak with us. This session was very informative. I would like to ask the audience, sorry about this, if you could help us with our post-webinar survey. Our desire is to keep improving, and these surveys are a very important part in evaluating our activities. I would also like to mention that a recording of this webinar will be available online in a few days and will be distributed through our social media. So keep in touch, and we hope to have you again in the future webinars, and of course the virtual conference later this year. I would also like to ask you to choose a we are looking to choose topics for the next virtual conference, which will be held later this year. So we would like to ask you to choose a topic using a poll that we have created, where you can choose the topics of your interest. And I will put both links in this chat box for you to access. So thank you very much for joining us, and have a good day.